Okay, we are getting close to the end. So moving on to the assertive message format, and the AMF, or assertive message format, kind of builds on the perception of, or builds on what we talked about earlier in the semester, perception checking, having the ability to check your perceptions. Are you accurate? And then 2, using I messages instead of using you messages, you, and rather using I messages and owning your own feelings. So in responding to challenging messages, we can use this assertive message format. And there are 5 main components to, or categories, in responding to someone that's challenging. So number 1 is the behavior. And then again, you're describing the behavior. You're not attacking the person, but rather you're describing the behavior. Number 2 is an interpretation statement, how you interpret the situation. Number 3 is your feeling associated with that. Number 4 is the consequence statement, and that explains what happens as a result of the situation that you just described. And number 5 is the 5th element of the assertive message format, and that's the intention statement. So you are communicating what your intention is. So I'll use an example of a situation that I had with a colleague, and she was also a friend, and this was years ago. And she had this idea for us to go see the Dalai Lama in Washington, D.C. during the summer. And I was really excited. I wanted to do that. And then, as fate would have it, my grandmother got really sick, and I had to go up to New York and help take care of her. And I was there for about 6 weeks. And it was a very difficult time. She almost died, and I had to care for her. And it was not only physically exhausting, it was emotionally, because this is the woman who I love more than anything. And so it was a very difficult time for me. And I was unsure whether or not I could go see the Dalai Lama. I did not know whether or not my grandmother would get better. And then she did get better in time. And I told my friend, and it was last minute, I can go. My grandmother said she is able to be on her own, and I believe her, so I can go. And my friend said, I already made plans to do something else, and I can't break them. And I went anyway, and she got very upset with me for going. And I was thinking, from my perspective, I have went through hell this summer, and how can you be upset, especially when we're going to see the Dalai Lama, who embraces peace? And her perspective was, this was my idea. We were supposed to go together. How could she go without me? So there are different ways of looking at it. Fast forward, the new school year begins, and she was not speaking to me. And this is difficult, 1, because we're friends, and 2, because we're colleagues, and we work closely in a department together. And it was very apparent to me and everyone else that she was ignoring me and not speaking to me. So this brought up a lot of feelings that I had from childhood when I was stonewalled, and one way that I was punished was one of my parents would not talk to me, would not talk to me for a long time. And as a young person, I did not understand it. And for me, it was the worst. It was a form of psychological torture. And it is an extremely, like I said earlier, an extremely unhealthy way to communicate to someone that you love. So that brought up those feelings within me, because not only was she my colleague, but she was also my friend. So we had to have a conversation, and fortunately, I learned in my education how to communicate better, because that's what my degree is in. And I was very fortunate, because my understanding of interpersonal communication is far greater now today than it was when I was 12 years old. So I was able to respond to my colleague in a very assertive manner. And if we use the 5 categories of responding to someone in an assertive manner, remember that it doesn't have to be in a specific order. It can be delivered in any order. You use the words that suit your personal style. You can combine 2 elements in a single phrase, like a feeling can be combined with an interpretation. And it takes some time to deliver the message, so knowing that. So pretty much how I responded to the situation was I told her that we needed to talk. And when we did sit down to talk, she gave her perspective and I gave my perspective. And essentially I described the behavior. And I didn't even focus on the actual event that had taken place. I focused on the aftermath, which was her not talking to me. And I said, I have to be honest with you. When in my childhood, I had great difficulty dealing with a parent not talking to me. And when I was ignored by you, it triggered those feelings. And those feelings were feelings of helplessness, were feelings of guilt, were feelings of shame. And I understand that you didn't do this to me personally, but this is what this type of behavior triggers in me. And I've spent a long time trying to work on this, but I can't have this in my professional life, and I can't have this in my personal life. So what I need to know from you is whether or not this is how you're going to interact with me, because as your friend, I value our friendship, but I also know that I cannot handle being with a friend that ignores me and doesn't talk to me and communicate with me when they have a problem with me. So I need to know what your intentions are, and I do value our friendship, but I know what I can and I cannot handle. And so I told her my intention. I told her the consequence pretty much within that intention. I described the behavior, my feelings, the feelings that were triggered, the guilt, the shame, the helplessness. And so there's no particular order, but I didn't attack her, but I did let her know that I have great difficulty dealing with being ignored. And so take it for what you will. Practice responding to challenging situations and challenging conversations in this manner, and it worked out well. She did respond really well to it, and she had her issues and I had my issues, and we were able to work them out, fortunately. But maybe with another person they might have just dissolved the friendship, and so we do not have control over how people are going to respond, but we can help others to respond so that they are less defensive when we criticize. So what do we do? So how do we get people to respond a little bit less defensively to criticism? Some people are very, very sensitive to criticism. Sometimes it's how you criticize. And again, when we talked about defensiveness at the beginning of this lecture, if you were irritated by every rub, how will your mirror ever be polished? So if we're really defensive all the time, it really prevents us from having healthier relationships. So what do we do? How can we respond that's more non-defensively to criticism? Well, number one, we can seek more information. So if someone has a problem with you about a particular situation, you can just ask them literally, so tell me more. So can you give me the details? What do you mean specifically? So you're then seeking more information. You're asking for the specifics. Okay, when you say that, and this leads us to the third one, guessing about specifics. When you say that I'm rude, can you tell me specifically what you mean? Can you give me an example of when I'm rude? Or if you say I'm condescending, can you give me an example of how I'm condescending? So you're asking for specifics instead of saying, no, I'm not. You can also paraphrase their ideas and what they're talking about. So you might say something along the lines of, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that when I act like this, you take this as a personal slam, and it makes you feel devalued as a person. Is that what I'm getting what you're saying? So you're actually paraphrasing their ideas, and that can help to diffuse a potentially defensive response. Another one is to ask what do they want? Say, okay, I'm hearing you. So what do you want to happen from this situation? What do you want? So if it's if it's your roommate and your roommate's complaining that you never do the dishes, and you might say, okay, So what would you like me to do? And the roommate's going to say, do the dishes. And then, okay. And then you can ask about the consequences of your behavior. So what does this mean? I did this. What does this mean for our relationship? And then sometimes how the person presents what's wrong may not actually be what's wrong. So sometimes you need to dig. And it might seem crazy to invite more criticism, but sometimes you do have to really dig at it. And if you ask the person if they're mad at them and they say, no, I'm not mad anymore, and you might say, I'm getting the feeling that there is something still wrong, and it's okay. Can you tell me what it is? Because I can hear it. I can listen to you. And so you want to dig a little bit more to find out what could potentially be wrong, and it may not be what they're addressing at that point in time. So moving on to more ways to respond non-defensively to criticism is you can agree with them, and it's okay. Sometimes maybe you are critical, or sometimes maybe you are a know-it-all, and you can agree with a critic. And you can say, yeah, I do that sometimes. So you can agree with the facts. And it's the easiest type of agreement to understand, but it's sometimes difficult to practice. So agreeing with the facts, but it can be difficult. So I'm not going to lie that it can be difficult to agree with the criticism, to agree with the facts. And also, you can agree with their perception without agreeing with the fact. So, for example, you could say, I could see how you could look at it that way. So you are not agreeing with them with the facts, but you're agreeing that you could see how someone might be able to perceive the situation that way. And so that's different than agreeing with the actual facts. Because if you don't agree with the facts, don't admit to agreeing with the facts when you don't. So that's not good for you, and that's not good for them, and that's not good for the relationship, because that will then cultivate hostility. And it could be hostility within you and hostility within them. Hostility within you because you feel like you have to agree or they'll get mad at you. And then hostility within them because you're being insincere, and you are being insincere. So you can choose, instead to agree with the facts, you can choose to agree with the perception. So we have covered a lot. I know that this was a very long chapter and a very long lecture. I hope that you were all able to stick with me through this. But we covered a lot, and we talked about the different ways to improve our communication climates within our work environment, within our familial environment, and also within, let's go back. Within our work environment, within our family environment, and also within our romantic relationships. Overall, self-awareness is huge, and we're not bad people if we respond defensively, and we're not bad people if we send disconfirming messages. But how great would it be if we have the self-awareness, number one, and two, now the skill set, and then three, the motivation to engage in healthier communication, to create a more confirming and healthier communication climate and environment in our workplace, with our colleagues, in our families, and also in our romantic and our other interpersonal relationships. So I hope you all have a good week, and I am here if you have any questions. Be well.